As someone who used to be an avid Tumblr user many years ago, I encountered the attempt to normalise many things that really shouldn't be normalised all too often. I've forgotten or perhaps repressed many of these things, but a subscriber recently sent me an email about the Consang community, in particular a blog created by a woman who's in a relationship with her dad. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video will centre around relationships between family members and will briefly discuss abuse that might occur in such relationships. Viewer discretion is advised. You can click the link in the description to become a Ko-fi member and watch an uncut and ad-free version of this video, which features extra details that were unsuitable for this cut. Consang is a term used to describe consensual, romantic and physical relationships between close family members, such as siblings or a parent and their adult son or daughter. So yeah, it's basically a glorified term for incest. The subscriber who emailed me sent a link to one blog in particular by a user named Consanguina Morose, we'll call her Rose, who was actually only active for a couple of weeks in September and October 2024. What's interesting about this blog though is that it does seem believable. If you search the tag Consang on Tumblr, a lot of the posts are very explicit erotica. We'll take a look at some of that later. But this blog is a relatively safe for work account of a Consang relationship, albeit a highly inappropriate one. It's not sensationalized, and there are no details of what they get up to in the bedroom, so it doesn't seem like it was created to appeal to people who are interested in such things solely as a fetish. Rosie's first post was on the 25th of September and read, "Hi everyone, I'm new to Consang positive community, but I've been lurking around for quite some time and I'm finally confident enough to join this. I'm a 27 years old cis bisexual woman, in a relationship with my dad. He's a 53 years old cis bisexual man. We've been in a relationship since April 2024. Looking forward to sharing my experience as someone in a Consang relationship, from daily life to fun facts about our relationship, both as father and daughter and as lovers. Sometimes I'll also vent about the challenges we face as a Consang couple." Some details about the relationship were provided in Q&As on the blog. An anonymous user asked Rose, "How did you ever pick up the courage to approach your dad? Have you known other people with similar relationships?" Rose answered, "I mean, we've always been kinda close since I was a kid, but I basically just took the leap of faith after kinda testing the waters, gradually being more touchy until it's basically something that's unusual for a daughter to do towards her father, and he didn't react negatively towards it." The blog about Consang relationships, Full Marriage Equality by Keith Pullman, also kinda gave me the courage I need, that I'm not alone in feeling this way, and that it should have been okay since now I'm an adult, therefore it's all fully consensual. And to answer the question, no, I haven't known any other people with similar relationships, at least in real life. Another anonymous user asked shortly after how the relationship started, and Rose said, "Basically, after kinda testing the waters a little bit and seeing that my dad didn't have any aversion towards what I did, I randomly just shoot my shot when we were lounging around on the couch in the living room. I didn't go for the straight shooter statement, like, I'm in love with you and whatnot, since I've always been a shy one when it comes to feelings in a romantic relationship. What I did was brought up about how I've been saving myself for the one, which is very unusual for someone my age in the first place already. But it's true. I think dating just for the sake of dating and not dating seriously with the intention of getting married would just be a pain in the arse, from the stories of my friends since I was in high school up until adulthood. When he asked about who that might be, referring to the one, I just answered, "What if it's you?" And well, the rest is history. Rose even shared a photo of her and her dad without their faces in an attempt to prove her story was real. In the same post, she clarifies that she doesn't live in the US and says that in the majority of countries in the world, Consang relationships are not outlawed. It might be true that some Consang relationships are legal in many countries, but this is typically between, say, cousins, not a father and daughter. I don't know of any country where this is legal, nor any culture where this is acceptable. Rose says in her country it's not technically legal, but there's no law regulating it, so it's technically not illegal. That may be the case, but it doesn't mean their relationship is socially acceptable. In fact, it sounds like it very much isn't, because she says they keep their relationship behind closed doors, so I'm not really sure what point she's trying to make regarding Consang relationships not being illegal in many countries. Another anonymous user left a message for Rose, quote, "I hope you don't find this weird when I say I find you and your relationship extremely interesting. I hope you and your dad are doing well." Rose replied, "Don't worry, I don't find it weird at all. I understand that our relationship isn't conventional and must have attracted a lot of curiosities from outsiders, but that's also why I joined this community. To shed some positive light on Consang relationships and that it can also be a healthy and fulfilling one, just like any other romantic relationships out there. And thank you very much for your kind support. My dad and I both really appreciate it." I'm going to discuss the morality of Consang relationships in depth soon, but to say they're just like any other romantic relationship is crazy to me. There is a huge difference between a relationship with someone you first met as an adult, or even someone the same age as you who you knew as a child, and someone decades older than you who literally raised you as a parental figure since you were a baby. It goes without saying that this is messed up on the dad's part, and makes you wonder if he felt the same way towards her when she was younger, perhaps even groomed her in preparation for this as an adult. Even if he didn't, as her father, he should have turned down whatever advances she made and set a very solid boundary. I kind of have mixed feelings on Rose herself. It's hard for me to condemn her on the same level as her dad because we really don't know what led to her developing these feelings. You for sure have to question her upbringing if she developed romantic feelings for her actual dad. If there was no grooming or anything like that, it's fair to say that as an adult, Rose should never have made the first move, but she is still the younger of the two and the daughter, as opposed to the parental figure. Wires have clearly been crossed here, but the daddy's much worse in my opinion. Generally speaking, as I've said in many other videos, I really don't care what goes on between consenting adults, as long as everyone's happy and no one is being harmed. What business is it of mine? I have to draw the line here though, and it's not because the thought of a father and daughter being romantically and physically involved disgusts me, even though it does. There are many paraphilias that are really not my thing, but that doesn't mean I have the right to stop others from participating. I've already made my thoughts on Consang relationships between a parent and their daughter or son clear. I think in most cases there probably will be grooming involved, even if nothing physical happened until the daughter or son was an adult. I acknowledge that this might not be the case in relationships between, say, siblings of a similar age. But aside from the risk to any potential children they might have, we're going to get onto that soon, I think a really important point is that family members should fill a different role to romantic partners. While everyone's families are different, I think it's important that children have some kind of parental figure, whether that's a mum and a dad, two mums or two dads, one mum or one dad. I don't need to explain why their role is crucial in the upbringing of a child. As for siblings, not everyone has them or even gets along with them, but if you have a brother or sister that you were close to growing up, or that filled the role of a sibling in some kind of way, even if you weren't particularly close, that's their familial role. And I think it can be damaging psychologically if lines are blurred and these relationships turn romantic. Furthermore, what happens if the Consang relationship turns sour and the couple break up? Aside from the fact that it'd be awkward as hell eating Christmas dinner across from your brother, who is also your ex, you've basically lost that familial role now. If Rose and her dad break up, even if it's amicably, is he just going to go back to filling the parental role after that? If it's a bad breakup, for example if there's cheating involved, they might well not even want anything to do with each other after that, in which case she's lost her dad and he's lost his daughter. With all that said, in the interest of trying to have an unbiased and objective discussion about Consang relationships, I think it is relevant to consider the morality of them. As I already said, I think there is almost always a moral issue when it comes to relationships between parents and their adult children, because of the possibility of them being groomed from a young age to accept such a relationship later in life. Rose actually addressed assumptions about her relationship in a post, quote, "People always assume that my relationship with my dad is an abusive one just because it's Consang, when in reality I'm a grown adult and already well into my adulthood when I started approaching him. Yes, I was the one who made the first move. He's the best father I could have ever asked for, and he raised me well. Of course I'd think that he's also the best man I could have ever known, and that he'd make the perfect man for me too. My dad has been nothing but respectful towards me, has always let me further our relationship in my own terms and at my own pace. He's never once made me uncomfortable, and makes sure to ask for my consent in every step of the way. To assume that my dad is an abusive father or a predator simply because we're in a romantic relationship on top of our familial relationship is to deflect and shift the blame from abusers to just types of relationship. Consang relationship doesn't mean it's an inherently abusive relationship." I question Rose's thoughts on this, because how would she even know if she had been manipulated as a young child? The fact that her dad went along with all this shows that he'd clearly thought about her in this way before. It's not like he'd always just seen her as a daughter, then suddenly everything changed the second she made a move. Furthermore, there will always be some kind of power imbalance in that relationship, which could absolutely result in psychological or other forms of abuse. These problems may not apply in Consang relationships between siblings, for example, if they're a similar age, so I think it is a bit more of a grey area when considering the morality of it. My philosophy is that something is morally wrong if it causes suffering, so if we take the example of a Consang relationship between two siblings of a similar age, both adults and both consenting, and avoiding having biological children together, I guess I can't really argue that it's morally wrong. That doesn't mean I think it's a good idea, for reasons I already covered, but I do think people just say it's wrong because they find it disgusting, and there's not a lot of critical thought behind that. Obviously, I'm not the authority on morality, and I'd be intrigued to hear in the comments if you have a moral argument against it. Anyway, perhaps the most common and valid argument against Consang relationships in general is the increased risk of genetic disorders in offspring. Rose reblogged a lengthy post discussing this, so I'll read it in parts then comment on it along the way. This is absolutely going to cause me to lose every single follower I have, but I do not care, so anyways, I have something I'd like to say. Incest is not inherently damaging whatsoever as long as it's consensual. There is zero scientific evidence that consensual incest is damaging. None. Of course, incestuous abuse absolutely exists and is extremely damaging to the victims of it, but what I am talking about is consensual relationships between adults. Before you call me insane here, in an article by Claire Consang from Stanford University, she states that one of the main and only scientific reasons that incest is illegal is that the offspring of partners with a high level of consanguinity are more likely to have birth defects. However, this is eugenics. Disabled people's children are also very likely to have children with birth defects, and anyone really could potentially have children with birth defects. This argument is simply that incestuous relationships should be illegal so that birth defects cease to exist. Keep in mind, the definition of eugenics is to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. In essence, make sure that the only people born are desirable, which would include being able-bodied. Consang goes on to explain that the act of incestuous intercourse does not cause harm. Incest does not inherently cause harm. The only reasons people give for the illegalization of incestuous relationships are eugenics and the potentially offensiveness of it due to the fact that the vast majority of people in this country have deep-seated beliefs that incest is immoral. This user does make an interesting point, but I think the word eugenics is an emotionally charged one, so to speak, that applies to many other characteristics aside from genetic disorders such as race. Not to mention the connotations of forced sterilization and the murder of millions of Jewish, Roma, disabled, and other groups of people who were seen as undesirable in Nazi Germany, which of course is absolutely abhorrent. It would be highly problematic to argue that, say, an Asian brother and sister shouldn't have children because that child will also be Asian, and being Asian is undesirable. I don't think we need to delve into that any further. I also see a huge problem with labeling specific characteristics as desirable, and putting measures in place to increase these so-called desirable characteristics in the general population over time. But I don't think this is the same as attempting to reduce the likelihood of certain disorders in children, and as with my philosophy on morality, my views on this centre around suffering. It doesn't, or at least shouldn't matter what a person's skin colour is, their hair colour, their height. These characteristics can result in suffering for people, but only because of racism or other discrimination caused directly by other people, which is of course a problem with society that needs to be continuously addressed, not with those characteristics themselves. Of course, people with disabilities and genetic conditions may also be discriminated against, and that's a problem in society that also needs addressing. But imagine a world where these problems with society didn't exist, and no one discriminated against anyone else for their race, physical appearance, disabilities. No one would be suffering because of the colour of their skin, for example. People with genetic conditions would suffer less in this way, but there would still be the suffering caused by certain conditions themselves, be that physical pain or a shortened life expectancy. This doesn't necessarily apply to all genetic disorders. For example, albinism doesn't shorten life expectancy, and aside from potential vision problems, most people with it are healthy and don't experience any pain as a result. But when you consider cystic fibrosis, for example, that's a condition that causes a lot of suffering and significantly reduces lifespan. So the user who made this post believes that it's not a valid argument to say that people in Consang relationships shouldn't have children because of the increased risk of conditions like cystic fibrosis, because that's eugenics. But I can guarantee this person doesn't have cystic fibrosis themselves, nor would they be happy to have it given the choice. Again, I want to stress that not all genetic conditions are the same. I wouldn't make the same case for a condition that solely affects physical appearance, for example, or makes someone's life different in some way that doesn't drastically reduce their quality of life. It also goes without saying that anyone with any kind of condition or disability should have the same rights and be viewed as equal to everyone else. My point is not about viewing people with genetic conditions as lesser or undesirable, it's solely about not wanting people to suffer. One problem with the eugenics counter-argument here is how far do we take it? In England and many other countries, all pregnant women are offered screening for Down syndrome, Edwards syndrome, and Patau's syndrome between 10 and 14 weeks of pregnancy. Should we stop doing this because it's eugenics and therefore immoral? Should couples undergoing IVF not be allowed to select embryos with no signs of genetic disorders over those that do, because that's eugenics? Should we stop discouraging women from smoking and drinking alcohol during pregnancy to reduce the risk of cognitive or physical disability in the baby because that's eugenics? The Tumblr user makes a point about disabled people's children being likely to have birth defects, but I don't think this is the same as people in Consang relationships. If a disabled mother had a 100% chance of having a child with a birth defect, regardless of who the father was, the only way to stop this is to prevent this woman having children at all, so basically by forced sterilisation. As I already said, I'm definitely not in favour of that, and I don't think any rational person would be. As for someone in a Consang relationship, no one is forcing them to not have children with anyone. They're just saying don't have children with your dad, your brother, or anyone else closely related to you. There's a massive difference here. Anyway, let's move on to the next part of the post. In an article by Maria Campo Redondo and Gabriel Andrade, they state that incest represents a risk, but this is not reason enough to illegalize incest. This is because other circumstances of sexual laws may lead to similar risks, and yet such practices are not illegal. Think of how AIDS is used to say that homosexuality should be illegal, how the possibility of miscarriage is used to say that people should only be getting pregnant at young ages, how the possibility of disabled children is used to say that disabled people shouldn't be having children. All of these are arguments that rely on nothing but disability should be eradicated. Ableism is so extremely ingrained in our society that people constantly search for the cure to every disability so that they won't have to deal with disabled people existing. I've had friends who have been told, your children will be disabled though, for being disabled, just like those who are in incestuous relationships have. You should be allowed to have a child as long as you or someone else is capable of taking care of them, no matter if that child is disabled or not. A child potentially being disabled is not a morally wrong thing. As the authors of this article say, the reasons why incest is illegal do not relate to public health and genetic risks. I've already addressed a lot of this, but I just want to highlight again the difference between wanting to cure certain conditions to reduce suffering and wanting to eradicate them so we don't have to deal with disabled people existing, as the user says in the post. There is a huge difference there. I also have a problem with how homosexuality always seems to be brought up when discussing any kind of sexual activity that is socially unacceptable or even undeniably immoral. I've seen people try to justify paedophilia, contact with animals, and various other activities that really shouldn't be justified using homosexuality. Being gay is not inherently harmful in any way, is not the same as being a paedophile, is not the same as having contact with animals, and it's not the same as being in a relationship with your mum or brother or daughter. If you really believe Consang relationships should be acceptable, then you should be able to justify them without using gay people as a crutch. Anyway, the post goes on to discuss a paper by Jeff Sebo, a professor in bioethics, medical ethics and philosophy, among others. In it, he claims that incest increases the incidence of inherited genetic diseases by about 3%, and OP states that this is a very small percentage, and therefore it's not enough to justify such relationships being illegal. I skimmed through this paper, and the reference for that statistic is another paper which states the following. Published medical studies continue to show evidence of an increased risk for birth defects, major medical conditions, and reproductive mortality in the offspring of first cousin unions, mostly attributed to autosomal recessive disorders. In couples with no known genetic disorders in the family, there is an additional 1.7% to 2.8% risk for significant birth defects in the offspring of first cousins above the general population risk. So this is focusing on children whose parents are first cousins. It doesn't apply to all Consang relationships, most of which within the Consang community on Tumblr seem to be parent and child or siblings. First cousins share an average of 12.5% of DNA, whereas siblings and parents and children share an average of 50%. I wasn't able to find a statistic for the incidence of genetic diseases in children whose parents were more closely related than cousins, but we can assume, given that they share more DNA, that the percentage would be significantly higher. Anyway, I've spent way longer dissecting this post than I intended to, so let's move on to another point against Consang relationships that isn't addressed in it. It's important to note that the vast majority of incest relationships are not consensual and involve abuse, often the abuse of children. When it comes to Consang relationships between consenting adults of a similar age where there is no power imbalance, such as siblings, when they choose not to have children together, I already said I find it hard to argue that it is actually immoral. Even though I'm not in favour of it, because I personally think it's likely to cause psychological harm, perhaps you could argue it's not my place to tell people what they can and can't do based on what I believe will harm them. That said, I think you can make a pretty solid case against the legalisation and normalisation of Consang relationships based on the fact that most are abusive. Obviously, even in a world where Consang relationships were legal, paedophilia and abuse would hopefully still be illegal, so it's not like a father could legally get into a relationship with his underage daughter, for example, but he could absolutely groom her throughout her childhood in preparation for the day she turns the age of consent, and it probably wouldn't seem as wrong as it does now. Not to mention situations where people could be coerced or even blackmailed into such relationships. In England, the age of consent is 16, so if Consang relationships were legal, a 16-year-old girl could legally be in a relationship with her dad. Imagine a situation where a 16-year-old who doesn't have the means to move out of the family home, as the vast majority don't, and they're manipulated into a Consang relationship because they'll be kicked out if they refuse. As for siblings, they wouldn't even necessarily have to wait until the age of consent to have a relationship, even though it would be illegal to have physical contact before this, and this could be problematic in many ways. While you can argue that many adult siblings with an age gap of, say, 3 years might not have much of a power imbalance, this gap is a lot larger the younger they are. If one was 12 and the other 15, you can see how there could be room for coercion and abuse here, particularly if you consider the impact of other family dynamics. For example, it's not uncommon for parents to treat their children differently, like one gets punished more harshly, or one is given the benefit of the doubt in disputes. There are various other possible scenarios I could discuss, but overall, I fail to see how the normalisation of Consang relationships wouldn't result in more abuse, and the normalisation of such abuse itself. Although it is illegal, there are still people that exist in Consang relationships. For the reasons I've detailed, I don't personally condone it overall, but ultimately, people will do what they want to do. Still, I think it's highly irresponsible and careless to campaign for such relationships to be legalised. Anyway, back to Tumblr. Rosie's blog was only active between the 25th of September and the 8th of October 2024. She seemed like she really wanted to shed a light on Consang relationships like hers, so I'm not sure why she gave up so quick. Perhaps she received a lot of backlash, or maybe her and her dad broke up. They'd been together around 5 months when she started the blog, so still pretty early days. A lot can go wrong around that time, even if you aren't a father and daughter. Whatever happened there, there's not much else to cover on that blog, so we'll move on. While there are posts similar to Rose's advocating for Consang relationships dotted throughout, the vast majority of the content under the Consang tag on Tumblr is erotica. A lot of these actually centre around the user's attraction towards their mum or their sister. I haven't seen many about their brothers or dads or other family members. I'll read half of one example, but will of course stop before it gets too explicit. Mum who gets really drunk on New Year's Eve and makes out with her daughter at midnight. Mum who feels awful about taking advantage of her daughter like that. Daughter who actually really enjoyed it and teases her mum all day afterwards. Daughter whose teasing escalates throughout the day until eventually she just pulls her mum into a deep kiss. Mum who's caught completely off guard and panics for a moment, but she can't help but give in to her daughter's affection. Many of these posts follow a similar structure and describe an imagined situation where their mum, for example, does something inappropriate, and eventually it just escalates to them having a full-blown physical relationship. These types of posts are always made by people whose family members have shown no indication that the feelings are reciprocated. Obviously, in any situation where a mother or father did reciprocate, like with Rose, I'd be questioning them, but it's quite a different situation when someone is fantasizing about their parents or their siblings who clearly don't feel the same way. The people writing these posts obviously aren't choosing to feel the way they do, and I certainly hope they choose not to act on it, but it honestly just makes me uneasy to imagine having a sibling or my child writing erotic fiction about me and posting it online. I think that's wildly inappropriate. While a lot of the posts under the Consang tag are describing situations where the family members made the first move, or at least consensually accepted the OP's advances, there are even a number of posts that sound not so consensual, such as this one, quote, "A mum who keeps weakly protesting with things such as, 'Stop, no seriously, we can't sweetie, no sweetie.'" Of course, the rest of the post quickly becomes very not safe for work and talks about pushing the mum onto the couch, and I'm sure you can imagine the rest. It also includes the line, "This is all she's ever wanted, even though she could never say no." This is actually terrifying. This person is literally fantasizing and posting online about essaying their own mother. I don't know if they genuinely convince themselves that their mum really does want it, or if they're just writing that to make their post sound less criminal. The worst part is, the post has 702 likes and 139 reblogs, and no one seems to be commenting on how concerning this is. This is far from the only post describing literal SA of family members. My understanding initially was that the Consang community centered around consensual romantic relationships, and that's what separated it from incest content, which I guess is mostly fetish related. But now I've seen literal SA fantasies under this tag, I'm not so sure anymore. The final thing I wanted to briefly discuss in relation to all this is another blog I found called Consang Pride. Most of the posts on here are art of fictional characters made to look like they're in Consang relationships, and answers to questions asked by other users who are either in Consang relationships or want to be. I'm sure you could predict where this is going from the name of the blog, but one of the posts made shortly after it was created was a poll asking, "Do you believe we should consider Consang part of the LGBTQIA+ community?" 27.2% of people said yes, 41% said no, 24.9% said maybe/unsure, and 6.9% said no opinion. I already touched on this a bit earlier, but I'm really tired of people trying to latch onto the LGBT community with totally unrelated preferences or even fetishes that are generally problematic. The LGBT community have fought hard for a long time to simply be able to exist without discrimination, and I don't think things like Consang relationships being included will destigmatize Consang. It'll just end up causing people to be less tolerable to LGBT people. As I said before, being in a Consang relationship is not the same as and has nothing to do with being gay or trans. Being gay is a sexuality, being trans is an identity, being in a Consang relationship is neither of these things. Such relationships being illegal prevent you from being in a relationship with a family member. It doesn't prevent you from being with anyone else in the world that you're attracted to, and as I understand it, Consang people are not exclusively attracted to solely their family members. I also want to highlight again that the majority of incestuous relationships are not consensual and are abusive. This doesn't apply to gay or lesbian relationships, most of which are between consenting adults and don't involve grooming or any other kind of abuse. Mothers or fathers who want to be in a romantic relationship with their children are predators. Most gay and trans people are not predators. Anyway, whoever is behind this blog decided to create a Discord server for the Consang community and made a post promoting it, quote, "First of its kind, pro-para, pro-consent, anti-illegal contact, rad queer, pro-ship Consang community server. Please be 14 plus bodily and mentally. Hope this makes up for the lack of posts. Hello, this is a safe place for people who experience Consang attraction of any variety to talk openly about their experiences. This server is pro-ship, pro-para, pro-rad queer, pro-consent, and anti-illegal contact. We are also accepting of all forms of plurality. 14 plus bodily. First of all, I don't know what they mean by please be 14 plus bodily and mentally. I hope to God that's not suggesting the community is open to people who identify as a different age, because that's a whole other problematic concept in itself, especially in an environment with children. Anyway, more to the point, how is it appropriate to allow 14-year-old children in this server? Aside from the fact that Consang seems to be more of a fetish than anything else for most people in the community, I can't be the only one who thinks we shouldn't be teaching 14-year-old children that it's okay and normal if their parents want to be in a romantic relationship with them. I think I've said pretty much everything I can say on this topic, and it's been a pretty interesting rabbit hole that reminded me of the craziness of Tumblr. I would be open to covering more Tumblr communities in the future, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that, or if you have any specific recommendations. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any suggestions you might have for future videos. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new video.